Lord, have mercy upon us. Christ, have mercy upon us. Lord, have mercy upon us. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Almighty God, who in thy wisdom and goodness hast appointed the office of rulers and parliaments for the welfare of society and the just government of men, we beseech thee to behold with thy abundant favor us thy servants, whom thou hast been pleased to call to the performance of importance thrust in these islands. Let thy blessing descend upon us here assembled, and grant that we may treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberation in so just and faithful a manner as to promote thy honor and glory, and to advance the peace, prosperity, and welfare of these islands and of those whose interest thou hast committed to our charge. And this we beg for Jesus Christ's sake. Amen. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of thy Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen.
Good morning, members. Welcome to today's sitting, members. The minutes from the sitting of the 19th of June have been circulated. Are there any omissions, corrections that are required? There are none. Minutes are confirmed as printed. Messages from the governor? There are none. Announcements by the speaker? I have the honor to announce that I have received the Ombudsman of Bermuda's annual report for 2019. This report has been submitted in compliance with Section 24(1) and 3 of the Ombudsman Act 2004. Okay. And it will be circulated for all members. There are no messages from the Senate. Papers and communications. We have a number of papers and communications this morning. The first is from the Minister of Health. First three, in fact. Minister of Health, would you like to present your papers?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to attach and submit for the information of the Honorable House of Assembly the Public Health COVID-19 Emergency Order 2020 as made by the Minister of Health under Section 107A of the Public Health Act 1949. I have the honor to attach and submit for the information of the Honorable House of Assembly the Public Health COVID-19 Emergency Powers Regulations 2020 as made by the Minister of Health under Section 107A of the Public Health Act 1949. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to attach and submit for the information of the Honorable House of Assembly the Public Health COVID-19 Emergency Extension Order 2020 as made by the Minister of Health under Section 107A of the Public Health Act 1949. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. The next papers this morning is in the name of the Deputy Premier. Deputy Premier, would you like to present your paper?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, good morning.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to attach and submit for the consideration of the Honorable House of Assembly the Riddles Bay Ward Parish Special Development Order 2020, proposed to be made by the Minister of Home Affairs, the Minister responsible for planning, in exercise of the power conferred by Section 15(2)(a) of the Development and Planning Act 1974. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Deputy. The next paper this morning is in the name of the Minister of Finance. Minister, would you like to present your paper this morning?
Please. Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Morning.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to attach and submit for the information of the Honorable House of Assembly the following regulations. Public Treasury Administration and Payments Temporary Unemployment Benefit Amendment Number 2, Regulations 2020.
Yes.
The Customs Duty.
You want 3 up, Minister.
The Customs Duty Bermuda Tourism Authority Remission Amendment Order 2020. And the Customs Tariff Approved Organization Amendment Notice 2020. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. There are no petitions this morning. We're now at statements. The first statement this morning is that of the Deputy Premier. Deputy, would you like to present your statement?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning to honorable members. Mr. Speaker, earlier today, I laid before the House of Assembly the Special Development Order titled the Riddles Bay Warwick Parish Special Development Order 2020 SDO. This SDO comes at a time when the island is reeling from the unprecedented economic downturn due to COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, in accordance with Section 15 of the Development and Planning Act 1974, the order will grant subdivision approval for the purposes of residential development and also to create new conservation land. Specifically, a total of 18 vacant lots will be approved, each to be developed with a detached house, and additionally, 2 significantly sized vacant conservation lots will be approved to be comprehensively planted and restored, which will provide a number of environmental and public benefits. Such benefits are to include the reestablishment of diverse native and endemic ecosystems, as well as opportunities for passive recreational use. Mr. Speaker, I am acutely aware of the developers' enthusiasm to proceed with this project. And to this end, I am pleased to confirm that remediation and initial planting works have already begun on the site for the conservation areas. Mr. Speaker, the preparation of this order was preceded by the subdivision application process by the Department of Planning. This project has undergone an exhaustive environmental analysis and scrutiny. The application submission included an environmental impact statement and conservation management plan. By virtue of the statutory objection process defined in the Development and Planning Act 1974, this application was afforded public scrutiny. The submission details were comprehensively reviewed by technical officers of the Department of Planning and Environment and Natural Resources, as well as the non-governmental organizations and members of the community. Mr. Speaker, to specify the details of the scheme, the developer proposes to convert approximately 25% or 23 acres of the total acreage of Riddles Bay to residential lots, while at the same time converting the remaining 75% of the total acreage, 64 acres, to publicly accessible conservation areas. Mr. Speaker, the additional 64 acres of conservation land is a significant contributing element of the scheme. The 2 conservation lots are split into 4 categories, including nature reserve, open space, recreation, and woodland. Notably, the overall size of this conservation area exceeds the size of the majority of government nature reserves and or national parks on the island. Mr. Speaker, the creation of such conservation lands will be achieved by way of conditions appended to the order requiring the implementation of a conservation management plan. A plan which details the necessary restorative works and planting works, together with the financial plan for delivery and subsequent maintenance thereof. Mr. Speaker, against the backdrop of the current challenges being faced by our community, I am certainly proud to introduce such a scheme that represents a significant ecological and social gain for the island. Further, this is one of the largest single luxury developments proposed in some time. It has undoubtedly tremendous potential to inject an estimated $75 million capital investment into the economy, provide a much needed stimulus to various business sectors, including construction and landscaping, real estate, and other retail service industries, and most importantly, provide jobs for Bermudians. Mr. Speaker, I would like to take the opportunity at this time to thank the developer for undertaking such a significant venture to create a luxury development while creating valuable conservation land for the benefit of the community. We applaud the developers for continuing to believe in Bermuda as a sound and promising jurisdiction in which to invest. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The next statement this morning is that of the Minister of Works. Minister Birch, would you like to present your statement this morning? Minister Birch, are you with us today? Minister Birch seems to have a technical difficulty. Can we move on and come back to Minister Birch? The next, Minister Birch? Okay, we'll move on and come back to you. Minister of Education, would you like to present your statement at this time?
Yes, can you hear me, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm having some technical difficulties as well.
Okay, we can hear you. We see your camera on. We don't see you in the camera, but we hear you.
Right, I'm trying to turn the camera around. I just can't figure out how to do that right now. You see my hand? It's showing through the back. But I can continue with my statement.
Okay, continue with your statement, and we'll work with you until you get it solved.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, every so often, there is a cry from members in our community for the introduction of Black studies or African studies in our schools. It comes as no surprise that with the recent protests at home and abroad and over ongoing racial injustices, this perennial cry has resurfaced. In response, Mr. Speaker, this morning I rise to share with my honorable information about the Bermuda and Global Studies strand of the social studies curriculum that is currently taught in our public schools at the primary, middle, and senior school levels. Mr. Speaker, we are all aware that the majority of Bermuda's population is of African descent, and it cannot be denied that the journey and struggle of Black Bermudians has defined significant aspects of. It is therefore appropriate that I provide my honorable colleagues and the country with information pertaining to the social studies curriculum in our public schools, and particularly the strand which focuses on Bermuda and global studies. Let me emphasize that the work carried out by the Department of Education, inclusive of curriculum, is guided by Plan 2022, the strategic plan for public school education. This is the pathway the department has been on since January 2018 and will continue on until we achieve an education system that is transformative for all students. Mr. Speaker, our technical officers have this year focused their efforts on ensuring that the social studies curriculum is grounded in a Bermudian context. Officers have revised and introduced the Primary 1 curriculum with resources, activities, formative assessments, and outside learning, i.e. field trips, for all primary years, P1 through P6. As the curriculum change focus with each year level, teachers at the primary level can center Bermuda's Black culture and history or use African culture references in the classrooms. Mr. Speaker, for children in primary 1 through 3, the emphasis is on learning about who they are, both individually and collectively. At primary 1, The family unit is central to the learning experience, and Afro-Caribbean and African references can be used to examine the family. At primary 2, children are exposed to their cultural origins, which include, but not exclusively, African and Caribbean. Young learners are exposed to food, music, cultural expressions, and economic activities of our various identities. Bermuda's culture and traditions, that is, our holidays, celebratory activity, and as well national and cultural symbols are taught in primary 3. Mr. Speaker, specifically, Black history is connected to cup match, the tradition of emancipation activities, and the gombe, a Black Bermudian cultural symbol that finds its origins in Africa, and having passed through the Caribbean, now has its own distinctive Bermudian appeal. Bermuda history continues at the upper school level with the teaching of geography, economics, and ethics taking center stage. Children learn about the island's discovery and in the context of the age of exploration, and our journey through the various global historical milestones, as well as the global connection to Bermuda's economic activity. Bermuda's Black history is interwoven throughout these historical narratives. Mr. Speaker, our technical officers are continuously reviewing the teaching resources and engaging in community partnerships around Bermuda history. This year, primary 4 students learned of the migratory experiences of Black Bermudians and how slavery developed in Bermuda during the 1600s. Primary 5 students deepened their knowledge of Bermuda's slave history, as well as the emancipation movement through Bermuda's own Mary Prince, who was pivotal in the anti-slavery movement and the abolition of slavery in the British Empire. Students learned about Sally Bassett, an icon in the slave revolt narrative. They also learned about the role of friendly societies played in advocating for and supporting newly emancipated Blacks. Icons such as Wesley L. Tucker and Roosevelt Brown are also introduced to students at this level. Mr. Speaker, the social studies curriculum also includes Bermuda's history of racial segregation, unfair work practices, and the nature of racial injustices, the struggle for reform, and these personalities who led this struggle. Hence, in primary 6, students learn of personalities and activists such as the Progressive Group, Dr. E.F. Gordon, Dr. Barbara Ball, Dame Lois Brown Evans, Sir John Swan, and their social political impact. They also learn about the Tuckerstown dispute and the social, political, and economic impact of the displacement of the Black Bermudian community. The social studies teaching resources explore the racialized climate of Bermuda in the 1960s and 70s and the parallel experiences of African Americans who form part of the African diaspora. Mr. Speaker, at the middle school level, the curriculum shifts from the local studies to global studies, featuring the Caribbean and ancient African kingdom. The curriculum during the past school year has seen the addition of Mansa Musa, who predated the transatlantic slave period, and the introduction of the African Diaspora Heritage Trail. At the senior school level, there is considerable flexibility on what is taught about Bermudian studies, but Bermuda studies is mandatory. With preserving our heritage and introduction to African courses offered as elective, the latter course provides a window for our senior students to see the African history outside the Middle Passage experience. Mr. Speaker, earlier I mentioned community partnerships. These partnerships have supported teaching and learning with the development of new resources and materials, helped to enhance the social studies curriculum, and supported professional development. The Bermuda National Trust, for example, produced an interactive history book on Black history and worked with the Department of Education to deliver remote learning for over 350 primary school students on topics such as from shipwreck to settler, from slavery to emancipation. Our partnership with the Bermuda National Museum resulted in the creation of the Transatlantic Slave Trade ebook for middle level 2 teachers and students, the development of a tourism ebook for the primary 6 teachers and students, and final editing of the Prudence Rebels Teachers Resource Guide. Mr. Speaker, we have several Bermudian professionals who have been a tremendous support to the Department of Education in providing professional development for teachers who deliver the social studies curriculum to our students. Thus, in closing, Mr. Speaker, I would like to acknowledge the professional services of Ms. Melody Van Putten, who delivered the development series for middle school teachers. Also, the Department of Education Officer, Dr. Randall Tankard, made a presentation on Mensa Musa, while Mr. Glenn Fubler of Imagine Bermuda delivered transformative leadership workshops. Additionally, our middle school teachers further developed and enhanced their Bermudian Black history knowledge with the participation in bus tours organized by Titan Express, highlighting the history of Black female slaves, Sally Bassett and Mary Prince. Mr. Speaker, both Bermuda and Global Studies has been incorporated into the social studies curriculum for our public school. Our children are receiving the history and culture of Black Bermudians and our African ancestry. We'll continue to review, revise, and enhance the curriculum so that our students have rich, relevant, rigorous, and authentic learning experiences grounded in their history and their heritage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister Burns, would you like to do your statement now?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
We can hear you, we can see you, so you're in order with what needs to be done this morning.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On June 5th, I assumed responsibility for both municipalities, the Corporation of Hamilton and the Corporation of St. George. My usual approach in these situations to any new department, Quango and now municipalities, once under my remit, is to do a meet and greet with the leadership shortly thereafter. Notwithstanding, as the government was navigating its way through the phases of COVID-19 pandemic, I did not have that luxury on that occasion. However, as soon as we were able, the Permanent Secretary and I carved out time to meet with the mayors and their secretaries, operating officers. Those meetings occurred on the 17th and 18th of June, respectively. Mr. Speaker, the meetings were fruitful and provided the respective mayors the opportunity to share with us a few of their objectives for the next year, as well as provide a snapshot of any outstanding matters which we could assist with. For both municipalities, I committed to advancing a number of exchange of land agreements between them and private landowners for the purpose of enhancing public sidewalk access, as in the case of the Corporation of Hamilton, to swapping a parcel of land for a nominal fee for the Corporation of St. George, which logistically made sense. Both mayors were advised these agreements were passed by the Cabinet this past Tuesday, and it is my intention to advance these agreements to this Honorable House before we prorogue for the summer. Mr. Speaker, I had no preconceived thoughts heading into these meetings, so for me, this was somewhat of an educational exercise, and I soon learned that these two municipalities are quite different. On the one hand, you have the Corporation of Hamilton that has quite a large facility with a human resource, finance, and engineering section to ensure the effective operation of the capital city. While on the other hand, you have the Corporation of St. George that has just under 20 staff in total, with these staff serving in many capacities, willingly, I might add, all in an effort to ensure the town of St. George's functions daily, albeit at a much slower pace. Mr. Speaker, we are well aware of the construction of the new St. Regis Hotel in St. George. Hotelco Bermuda has remained true to its commitment to bring to Bermuda the first new hotel in over 30 years. Concurrent with that activity is the upgrade works ongoing at the St. George's Club, which, similar to the St. Regis project, is scheduled to come online in April of 2021. Mr. Speaker, everyone in Bermuda likes to travel. So now that the airport is officially reopened, I am certain residents will be looking for the frosty smoking to get them off the rock. The expectation of landing at their desired travel destination brings with it the ability to have access to comfortable accommodations, good shopping, dining options, souvenir stores, to local entertainment. So if we can expect a certain level of service offerings while traveling, surely we must provide the same for our visitors. Mr. Speaker, I have never been one to mince my words, so I took the liberty of reminding the team of the Corporation of St. George that they must up their game and be ready for when the visitors descend on their town in 10 months. No longer does anyone want to hear St. George's used to be this or used to be that. I challenge the team to get with the program, as none of us want visitors landing on our beautiful island only to complain that St. George's was a sleepy old town with nothing to do. That would not be fair to the investment made by the developers in these, and it would not bode well for Bermuda's reputation as a vibrant tourism destination. Mr. Speaker, I was equally disappointed to learn that there are over 55 shops in St. George's, with less than 10 of them open on a good day. I also heard, whether anecdotally or factual, that if you are not from St. George's, it's an uphill battle for an outsider trying to make a go with their business. I met this week with the area MPs, Mr. Kim Swan, JPMP, and Mrs. Renee Main, JPMP, who have both pledged their commitment to working with the ministry and the corporation to make the town of St. George's the vibrant place it can be. I reiterated to the area MPs the same message of that to the corporation of St. George, and that was, we have to bring some life back to the town, which could include the once popular historic tours of the town, reenactments, to the use of any other assets. You have to forgive me, Mr. Speaker, but I am not from St. George's, so my recommendations were somewhat general in nature. But on that same note, the East Enders have to be creative as the modern traveler is looking for an experience that they cannot find elsewhere. So this has to be an all hands on deck approach, as April 2021 will be here sooner than we think. I've invited the Corporation of St. George to collaborate with the departments in the Ministry of Public Works, especially the Krangos, for advice, resources, and support. A good example of reviving a product is what has been done by the West End Development Corporation at the opposite end of the island. I won't go into detail, as we know that product speaks for itself. Mr. Speaker, I am convinced that the people of St. George can rise to the occasion and make their town the vibrant but still historic metropolis that we all know it can be. This government stands ready to work with them to make that happen. Mr. Speaker, as for the Corporation of Hamilton, therein lies the elephant in the room. That being the municipality reform legislation that was tabled in this House last year. It is no secret that it was the then minister's intention, who had responsibility for municipalities, to bring this legislation back to the House after the summer break. He was carrying out a government initiative, and I can see no reason why I would change course now that I have assumed this responsibility. Mr. Speaker, on an island as small as ours, I simply cannot understand why there are three separate governments. In the case of the Corporation of Hamilton, we have to consider economies of scale, more so in this post-COVID environment. You have the government on the one hand collecting garbage, providing engineering services, managing waste and sewage, while the Corporation of Hamilton provides the exact same services, only delineated by the invisible line in the sand. This is but one example of duplication of effort, and we must have the serious conversation, as the island is only 21 miles long, and in most jurisdictions, the municipality has a larger footprint. Mr. Speaker, I realize that many have their views on this, but what I can say is that the former administration had a similar view. However, this administration is not afraid to take this on, hence the tabling of the legislation. Mr. Speaker, yesterday, the Permanent Secretary and I had the privilege of being accompanied by one of our outstanding summer students, Mr. Demetrius Richardson, on the site to the Corporation of Also accompanying me was the Mayor of Hamilton, Mr. Charles Gosney, the Chief Operating Officer, Mr. Dwayne Keynes, and the City Engineer, Mr. Patrick Cooper. This visit included a tour of the various areas from the maintenance of stores facility, the sign painting shop, the electrical and carpentry shops, to the human resource area. It was evident that the corporation has taken to heart the government's COVID-19 policies, as adequate signage, sanitization stations, social distancing, and mask protocols were being followed. Mr. Speaker, this visit also supported my thought process, and that truly there could be some form of consolidation to achieve economies of scale and reduce expenditure. However, what this consolidation looks like has yet to be determined. But this visit did provide me food for thought. So, Mr. Speaker, I will close with this. Not everyone likes change. Not everyone understands change or why it is necessary. But what I will say is this. This administration will effect change by doing what we believe is best for the people of this country, despite the backseat drivers telling us where they think we should go. In the case of both corporations, the discussions were frank and honest in both directions. But we all agreed to work collaboratively for the benefit of our joint constituents, the people of Bermuda. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The final statement this morning is in the name of the Minister of Labor. Minister Hayward, would you like to present your statement?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Good morning, Minister. Continue.
Today, I'm pleased to announce that the Ministry of Labor will hold its first national tripartite social dialogue meeting to focus on the hotel industry on Friday, the 10th of July, 2020. Mr. Speaker, the overall objective of the meeting is to help ensure greater cooperation amongst tripartite partners and build consensus on the way forward for the hotel industry. The dialogue will bring together representatives from employees, employers, and the government to discuss policies, laws, and other matters that affect the hotel industry in light of COVID-19 pandemic and the impact it has had on Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, the more detailed meeting objectives involve having constructive dialogue and propose solutions to gain common understanding of the issues and challenges facing the hotel industry in Bermuda, identifying collective quick wins, identifying actions needed to enable hotels to reopen, identify ways to increase the number of Bermudians employed in the hotel industry over the long run, enhance training and development opportunities for Bermudians to prepare for initial entry and re-entry into the hotel industry, identify how job security can be increased for industry participants, and articulate factors needed to ensure the growth of the hotel industry long term. Some of the topics that may be discussed include current and future state of the hotel industry post COVID-19, collective bargaining agreements, redundancy and layoffs, work permit issues, repatriation of workers, hotel redevelopment matters, unemployment benefits, training and development programs. Mr. Speaker, national tripartite social dialogue brings together government, workers, and employers to discuss public policies, laws, and other decision-making that affect the social partners. A tripartite consultation can ensure greater cooperation among the tripartite partners and build consensus on the way forward for the hotel industry. The tripartite social dialogue methodology includes preparation, discussion of issues, clarification of goals, negotiations of agreements, and implementation of agreed action. In light of the COVID-19 pandemic, Bermuda's economy has been significantly disrupted, leading the hotel industry to sustain substantial losses. With the gradual reopening of the country, it is critical that urgent action are taken. Mr. Speaker, the meeting will be held on Friday, the 10th of July, 2020, from 9:30 with the following meeting attendees. Representation from the Hotel Employers of Bermuda, representation from the Bermuda Hotel Association, representation from the Bermuda Industrial Union, representation from the Ministry of Labor, and representation from the Ministry of Tourism and Transport. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Hayward. That brings us to the end of the statements for this morning. We'll now move on. There are reports of committees. There are no reports this morning. This now brings us to the question period. There are two written questions this morning, both requiring oral response. However, the first question this morning have been carried until next week, until next sitting. And so we'll move on to the second question, and that second question is to Minister Hayward from MP Richards, and the time now is 10:38, and you know we have 60 minutes for the entire question period. Mr. Richards, would you like to put your question?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, thank you.
MP.
Okay, good morning. The first question is this. In order to gauge Bermuda's workforce requirements, Will the Honorable Minister please advise this Honorable House of the number of work permit renewals applied for but subsequently denied since the inception date of the first curfew imposed in relation to COVID-19?
Thank you, MP. Minister?
Mr. Speaker, the total number of work permit renewals applied for but subsequently denied was 159.
Thank you. A supplementary?
No supplementary at this time, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, would you like to answer your second question?
Yep.
Continue.
Will the Honorable Minister advise this Honorable House of the specific job categories and the number of work permit renewals applied for but subsequently denied in each category since the inception date of the first curfew imposed in relation to COVID-19?
Minister?
Mr. Speaker, the specific job categories and the number of work permit renewals denied are as follows. Administrative support team leader, 1. Assistant manager, 7. Assistant restaurant manager, 1. Assistant store manager, 1. Assistant supermarket manager, 3. Associate, 1. Baker, 2. Driver, 1. Bar and restaurant manager, 1. Beauty therapist, 1. Butcher, 1. Caregiver, 1. Carpenter, 1. Chef, 1. Chef de parquet, 19. Chef manager, 1. Cleaner, 5. Cleaner caregiver, 1. And supervisor, 1. Army chef, 1. Dining room captain, 1. Domestic worker, 1. Executive assistant, 1. Executive director, 1. Experienced landscape gardener, 2. Experienced associate, 1. Experienced cleaning technician, 1. Experienced landscape / hardscape, 1. Experienced server, 2. Fire protection specialist, 1. Food and beverage server, 26. Food and beverage waiter, 1. French, Spanish, head of foreign language, 1. General assistant dining room, 1. Group and local sales AVP, 1. Hairstylist, 4. Hairstylist nail technician, 1. Housekeeper cleaner, 8. IT services manager, 1. Landscape foreman, 1. Landscape foreman, 2. Landscape gardener, 9. Landscape gardener mason, 1. Landscape hardscape gardener, 2. Legal secretary, 1. Live-out caregiver, 1. Live-out caregiver housekeeper, 1. Manager, 1. Mason, 3. Mechanic, 1. Paralegal, 1. Pastry chef, 1. Personal trainer, yoga, 1. Prep chef, 1. Qualified accountant, 1. Restaurant manager, 2. Retail operations manager, 1. Silver service, food and beverage waiter person, 3. Spa therapist, 2. Superior landscape gardener, 1. Switch manager, 1. Technology sales specialist, 1. Waiter waitress, 14.
Is that it, Minister? Thank you. Supplementary, Mr. MP Richards?
No supplementaries at this
Would you like to
time.
put your third question?
Yes, sir. I would like to thank
Continue.
the Minister for the very comprehensive list. Third question. Will the Honorable Minister advise this Honorable House of the number of qualified Bermudians registered with the Department of Workforce Development available to take the positions in each category where work permit renewals were applied for but subsequently denied since the inception of the first curfew imposed in relation to COVID-19?
Thank you. Minister, would you like to respond?
Mr. Speaker, this information is not available to the House at this time for two reasons. First, the system and processes within the Department of Workforce Development are not yet at a point of maturity to enable this data to be retrieved. Some of this data is not captured. Additionally, some of the data available may not be current and will require data cleansing. Second, the categories of information in the Workforce Development RIT system do not directly align with the immigration work permit descriptions, leading to a mapping exercise being required. This is not precise and will provide misleading comparisons. For example, the immigration work permit categories lists 14 distinct job titles in the restaurant industry. However, the Workforce Development Department's data indicates a restaurant industry count of 1,534 persons unemployed, consisting of both Bermudians and non-Bermudians. Mr. Speaker, clearly the above indicates that the information is simply not available in an appropriate format to answer the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. MP, would you like to put a supplementary question or?
Yes, I would.
Okay, put your supplementary.
Yes, the supplementary to the minister is this. I understand the difficulty that he's encountering getting the answer to that particular question. Does he anticipate the processes being put in place that would enable the department to get that information? And if that information does become available, would he make it available to the opposition?
Minister?
Mr. Speaker, the answer to that question is yes.
Thank you. No further supplementary?
No further supplementaries. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Numbers?
Speaker.
Oh, yes, it's supplementary?
Yes, sir. Find me on the list. Oh, here we go.
Can you speak up just a little? I'm having a little trouble hearing you come through.
Yes, the minister.
MP Panther, put your supplementary, yes.
Yeah, thank you, sir. The minister indicated yes, he intended for the information to be made available ultimately. Does the minister have any indication in terms of the time frame within which he's projecting that this information might be made available?
Thank you. Minister?
I don't have a date on the time frame, but I can elaborate a little bit on the process. And once we cleanse the unemployment information, we'll be able to do assessment of those persons that are unemployed. We would appreciate that you have persons registered on the job board that are not necessarily unemployed, but persons who are gainfully employed and also seeking occupation in other categories.
Thank you. No further supplementaries?
No, I'll pass it.
Thank you, members. We'll now move on to questions this morning regarding statements that were given by ministers. The first statement this morning was by the Deputy Premier in reference to the SDO. And Deputy Premier, you have two members who wish to ask questions of this morning. The first is from the MP constituency 10, MP Dunkley. MP Dunkley? Okay, the second is from MP Richards. MP Richards, would you like to put your question to the minister regarding the statement this morning?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thank you. From the statement this morning by the Deputy Premier, the Development Application Board refused the application because the subdivision to create residential lots in a recreational zone failed to conform to various provisions of the draft Bermuda Plan of 2018, which was recently extended in this very House. I've been made aware that more than 10 sections of the Planning Act were violated. My question is this: why did the minister decide to override the decision of his own Development Applications Board and to allow this project to proceed at this time?
Minister, would you like to respond?
Yes,
Mr. Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the question from the honorable member. I think the question slightly is implying an effort to violate And I don't believe that's the appropriate way to look at this, Mr. Speaker, in that the planning law did not allow for the board to approve the development based on the numerous different zonings and the type of zoning that is in the Riddles Bay project. So in order to ensure that this development, which was believed by all, was definitely in the national interest, the SDO process was recommended to be used. This did not exclude, as my statement said, the opportunity for the public to have their say. It did not exclude the opportunity for this to be very transparently handled. But as the current law accommodates, it could not be approved by the board under the current law. And that was the recommendation that we followed. So the SDO process is being followed based on having gone through the process, and it is felt that this is clearly a project in the national interest, and the SDO process is the best way to ensure that it gets the appropriate public scrutiny and can move forth in the best interest of the country. So this was not, I take issue with the implication of violation of planning law. I do not believe that's the appropriate way to address it.
Thank you, Minister. Excuse me. Thank you, Minister. MP Richards, you have supplementary?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Minister, for clarifying that aspect of the process. My question deals with the minister did mention that the public was given the opportunity to weigh in. I'm curious, what were the number of letters that were sent to the Department of Planning by members of the public, those both supporting the project and also those who had objections to the project?
Minister?
Information I do not have at hand right now to be accurate to the actual question of the honorable member. I know that there were considerable letters in the hundreds. I also know that of persons who gave comment to the development. Some of those letters were actually from people overseas, so they had to be very much inspected and scrutinized by the planning department. But I will get a precise number to the honorable member if he allows me to make that undertaking.
Thank you, Minister. MP, are you comfortable with that?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Would the minister be able to give me a time frame of when those answers will be available?
I will, during this session, make the inquiries to my planning team, and if I can get them to him today, I will do so. If not, I will get a precise time that I will get them, and I will communicate that to him as soon as I can.
Thank you. Okay. Further question or supplementary?
I
No,
have a
that's it from
speaker.
that's it from me, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, it's you. Supplementary, I hear from MP Patlin.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct? Would you like
Yes,
to put
sir.
your supplementary?
Thank you, sir. The supplementary question is, the minister indicated that there was a plethora of that were not provided for within the legislation to allow this application to go through the normal process. The question that I have of the minister is there any intent to change, to make legislative changes to accommodate a better process to harmonize things going forward?
Okay. Minister, were you able to hear the question?
I'm sorry, I did not hear the honorable member clearly. I had question of the honorable member clearly. I had some sound problems.
Okay. MP, can you just summarize it rather than go into the full detail? Can you just put summarization to what the actual question was?
Yes, sir. Minister indicated that there were a plethora of reasons why the application could not go through the traditional process. The question is there an intent to make legislative changes so that to harmonize things so that going forward, these types of applications will be able to go through the normal process as opposed to an SDO?
Minister?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I cannot predict what legislative changes the government will make around these matters, but I would suggest to the member that the House currently has the opportunity, as the legislation provides, to give scrutiny to any applications of SDO. This application actually did go through the normal process with planning, and people did have the opportunity to critique it and give their comment and views on it. And that particular process will not be abridged, because that's a right that every public member of the public should have to any application. It was, and certainly I am not necessarily able to say where we're going to go right now with the planning law, because I don't believe that the fact that we've had to come this way is a problem. The fact that SDOs at this point come to the House was to ensure the highest level of public scrutiny to applications that may have a public interest value. So at this point, I can't give a crystal ball as to where the government will go to any such changes.
Thank you, Minister. Any further supplementaries? No further supplementaries? I'm going to move on. MP Dunkley, are you available to put your question out?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, good morning.
Good morning. Go ahead and put your question to the Minister.
Deputy Premier, you mentioned twice in the answer to my colleague, MP Richards, this decision was made in the national interest. Can you define the parameters regarding your decision made in the national interest? What were the overriding factors in your decision-making process?
Minister?
I can loosely give a description. Certainly the magnitude of the project itself, the implications that it had for the changes in the zoning, which were substantial, the amount of investment that the developer and the team desired to bring to the actual development, the protection of the substantial protection of land that will be afforded the area, as well as the amount of jobs and opportunity that it would bring to the country. In an informal way, those are the sort of things that were considered to be in the national interest. There is also some description in the law as to how SDOs should be actually used as well.
Mr. Speaker?
Yeah, you have supplementary, yes?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. To the Honorable Deputy Premier, appreciate the answer. Does this now set a precedent in that individuals or groups who buy land under one set of planning regulations, knowing very full well that what their development magnitude might be, can appeal it down the road to the minister and in time change it to allow more development than was originally agreed to?
Madam Minister, you can answer.
Yeah, I would say no. SDOs are considered on a case-by-case basis. And even the fact that we came this direction was after technical review and technical advice. So this is not a decision that's made on the whim of the minister alone. It is made after the planning team and the Department of Planning and the Department of Environment and Natural Resources and the expertise within those departments and others have given proper consideration to any such development and has advised the minister from a technical standpoint. These decisions aren't made just by the whim of a minister. They're made actually after receiving advice as such.
Mr. Speaker?
Yeah, hello?
Yes.
Yes, would you like to put
Yes, I'd like to put a question. Yes.
supplementary there, Mr. Simons, MP Simons?
Mr. Minister, can you reconfirm the acreage that the project will give as far as public community space?
Yes, it's outlined in the statement. It is 64 acres. It's 75% of the land. The total acreage of Riddles Bay is around 90 plus acres. So 75% of the land will actually be protected conservation land open to the public.
And that will become part
Is
of
that supplementary?
Yes,
Supplementary?
supplementary. And that
Yes.
will become a part of our park system?
No, it'll be privately, I believe it'll be privately held, but it'll be open to the public.
And for some final supplement, and what type of agreement will we have with that? To confirm
Those are part of the conditions that you saw in my statement that will be embedded in the SDO. Along with the, as I said in the statement, the funding to support the conservation plan and the funding to maintain it thereof are built into the actual conservation plan and the conditions of the SDO.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Simons, you have used up your supplementaries. Anyone else have supplementaries?
Yes, I have a supplementary.
Sounds like the opposition whip. Remember, you can put your supplementary.
Thank you. Minister, I'm just curious, given the fact that we are in an economically, financially strained environment right now, and given some of the historical financial strains that other special development projects have incurred in the past, what assurances do the people of Bermuda have that this project will actually be developed and then sold appropriately? Have there been any indications that these properties are already committed financially?
Minister?
Thank you for the question, Honorable Member for Constituency 20. The developer, as I made in my statement, is quite enthusiastic to move forward with this project. We have been working closely with the developer to make sure that everything was shaped in a way that was appropriate and would meet the requirements that the government wanted in the SDO, but also would make it suitable for the project to move forward. This developer is ready to go as soon as this process is finished. And they have continually expressed their confidence in Bermuda and that their capital is still waiting to be deployed to start and complete this project. And the developer also indicated, if I can just conclude here, that there is interest already expressed in purchasing any some of the 18 lots or units that will be developed in the property.
Thank you. No supplementary.
No supplementary. Thank you. MP Dunkley, you had started that round of question. You put one question. Other members had supplementaries. Do you have any more questions?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Would you like to do your second question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Honorable Deputy Premier, did the advice of the technical officers to the DAB, did it differ than the advice that you got when reviewing after making the SDO decision? Was it the same advice or was there a difference?
Minister?
I was advised by the Department of Planning, and that is the advice that I relied on. There was no conflict in any advice that was given from any of the bodies within, as far as I know, in the Department of Planning. I got one set of advice from those who would have had responsibility for considering this, and that is what I took into consideration.
Supplementary on this, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary? Yes.
Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Minister, in response to a question from my colleague Sylvan Richards, mentioned that there were hundreds of objections, and the Minister was unable to provide any details. Is the Minister able to provide details on what the main objection point would have been by the hundreds of objectors?
Actually, Speaker, I thank the Honorable Member for 11 and the Honorable Member for 7 for their questions around this. I actually have the information on the objections afforded to me by able members of the technical team at planning. There were actually 39 objections and 1 petition. It is a petition that had hundreds of names on it. That's why I made reference to hundreds, I believe. But actual objections, there were only 39 proper objections. And 1 petition.
How many names on the petition? How many names on the petition, Mrs. Speaker?
I have no idea. I would have to go back and look at that. But there was a petition. I will confirm the number, and I'll withdraw my reference to hundreds because that may be incorrect. But I know that I did hear a reference at one point in this conversation that there were petitions, whether there was an official petition on social media that made reference or some sort of petition was made, we were made known of that had hundreds of names. I don't know whether it was an official petition, but since my technical office has provided it, I will find out more about it and provide it to members who have asked.
Thank you.
Last question, Mr. Speaker.
MP, would that be your third question?
I have a supplementary on that.
Supplementary, hold on, MP Dunkley. MP Patsley, you have a supplementary?
Yes, sir.
Supplementary.
My supplementary question is, the minister did not indicate the categories of the areas of objection. Could he share that with us in respect of his response that there were 39 objections plus a petition? The categories, what major categories underlie the objections that were received by the department?
Thank you, Minister.
I will get that information and provide. I do not have it with me at this moment.
Thank you. MP Dunkley, would you like to put your third question?
I believe I have a supplementary to that.
You have a supplementary of your second question? Put your supplementary, yes?
What was the advice of the technical officers to the Deputy Premier received?
Hello? I didn't hear. There was very muffled, that question, Mr. Speaker. I didn't hear.
Mr. Speaker, what was the advice of the technical officers?
I think the Honorable Member would know that advice between ministers and technical officers are privileged. I think he understands that as a former minister and premier. So I can't say I can share that at this point. But certainly my decision to actually move forward with this SDO and the cabinet's decision and the government's is reflective of whatever advice that we receive.
Thank you. Would you like to do your third question now, MP?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the answer. I'm not so sure I agree with that. I don't think it is confidential in an SDO decision. I think the advice is pertinent to
we're looking at that. Okay, put your third question at this point.
Okay, I just made that point. Third question to the Honorable Deputy Premier: will the properties be available to Bermudians and non-Bermudians?
Deputy?
Hi, that was very muffled. I did not hear the question from the Honorable.
His question was whether the properties would be sale to Bermudians and non-Bermudians, or available to Bermudians and non-Bermudians.
I believe the property will be available to anyone. I don't know what the ARV or the level is, but these are luxury properties. I do believe they will be available to international and local purchase.
Supplementary, or no? That was the supplementary. Do you have a third question now?
And that was my third question. I'm finished.
That's your third question. I'll supplementary to your third question, brother.
No, Mr. Speaker.
No, thank you. Repeat that.
Speaker, I do have some answers related to some of the questions that members had. Shall I just send them to them directly? No.
Say that again.
I have some of the answers to some of the questions that members had. that they presented to me that I said I would undertake to give. Shall I just send it to them directly, or shall I give them now?
What would you like to give them now, being you've introduced?
I'm happy to. I'm all about transparency on these matters.
Okay, continue on, Minister.
In relation to objectors, and the types of objections that came, of the 39, objectors wanted it to stay in open space. The interesting point to make is that recreational zoning allows a wide variety of development, i.e., the fact of the matter, Mr. Speaker, is that right now you could put an amusement park up there based on the zoning that is at Riddles Bay. But with the changes that we're making, it will be protected conservation land. So the actual direction we're going will provide further protection rather than leaving it open now to a type of development that would not be in the public interest. The actual petition was titled the Santa Claus petition, or there was somebody, one of the names on the petition was Santa Claus. So that's the type of names that we found on the petition. I can get more precise numbers as to how many people were on the actual petition. The main items of objection were the perceived loss of open space, which I do believe, by virtue of the direction we're going, Mr. Speaker, that is not actually the truth. Actually, we will be creating one of the largest public open conservation spaces in the history of Bermuda, based on what has been done in the past. 64 acres, that's one of the largest areas that will exist, comparable to Spittle Pond and the Arboretum and other areas. Obviously, perhaps there were others who will come forward publicly to say what they may have objected to, but I'm outlining actually what was the main content of the objections was the loss of open space.
Thank you for providing that additional information. Okay.
Mr. Speaker, I have a supplementary in respect of that provision of new information. Is that permitted, sir?
No, let me just check. I know when you asked the supplementary, you had asked one, so that means you would have one more supplementary left.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, you just indicated in your response that you are creating one of the largest public open spaces, but earlier you had indicated that this was still going to be privately held land, and that there may be some kind of permissions given. Can you clarify, or maybe I misunderstood?
I did not say that there will be any permissions given. This will be privately owned, but it will be publicly accessible conservation land. And so it may be privately owned, but there's a commitment that the public will have access.
Thank you, Minister. And that brings us to an end of the questions for your statement. The next statement where members have, the next statement that members have indicated they would like to put questions is for the Minister of Works. Minister Birch, you have two members who wish to put questions to you. The first is the opposition whip. Honorable Member Whip, would you like to put your question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Go right ahead.
My question is that, for the minister, is that given the advice, resources, support, and serious conversations that he mentioned in his statement, I'm wondering if the minister and the corporations have considered offering entrepreneurial opportunities for some of the services traditionally carried out by corporations.
Thank you. Minister?
There's been no discussion on that subject matter at this stage.
Okay. Supplementary or additional question? Remember?
Is there an additional supplementary? Is there intention to consider the fact that some of these services that you mentioned, things like sign painting and body work, could be entrepreneurial opportunities in the future?
All options are on the table, but I can say that in the case of the Corporation of Hamilton, in relation to those areas, they actually perform them quite efficiently. And there's cause for a review of some of the things that we're doing in public works that we don't do as efficient. So I'm not sure that that would be an area that that we would head down the road of privatization. But certainly it's early days yet. The conversation has just started, and all options really are on the table at this stage.
Thank you, Minister. Further supplementary and new question.
Further supplementary.
Second supplementary, yes.
Minister, have especially given the St. George's Corporation and the small team there, are there any thoughts of increasing some of the services that the St. George's Corporation provides, and again, allowing for an opportunity for entrepreneurial development?
The short answer would be that we've not had those discussions, but all options are on the table. What we've done initially is to offer to the Corporation of St. George support from areas of the ministry and the clangers, particularly those that have similar challenges to themselves, to take advantage of.
And I have one second question.
Second question, yes.
When having serious conversations with...
Actually, that's your third question.
Okay, that's fine. Minister, given the serious conversations had with the Corporation of Hamilton, I know historically they've had a real issue with the complexities around some of the sewage and drainage in the city. Was that one of the conversations that was addressed as far as moving forward and what could be done, whether it's joint with the ministry and the corporation to address some of those issues?
The discussions did not delve down to that level of detail, but during the tour yesterday, there is a pumping station at the depot, and so we briefly touched on those subjects in terms of some of the challenges that the corporation are having. Those are quite timely, as the water and sewage section of the ministry has done a significant amount of work in terms of an island-wide effort to deal with that subject, and there is an RFP out for ideas on that subject, and so we'll certainly piggyback both corporations' challenges in that regard.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nothing else.
Thank you. Minister, you have one other member who would like to put questions to you, and that's the MP from constituency 10. MP Dunkley, would you like to put your questions now?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning, Minister. Minister, there was a good deal of angst last year when this legislation was discussed. Has the government had any discussions with the two corporations to review the legislation to make any changes which might deal with some of their concerns?
Not at this stage. We did touch with both corporations. We did touch on the Municipalities Act, but as I indicated in the statement, it's a meet and greet actual meeting. I am scheduled to attend. Well, I don't think it's scheduled yet, but I've indicated that I wish to attend the actual council meeting for each corporation, and I'm sure that even prior to today's statement, those items will be up for discussion.
Thank you.
Supplementary or new question?
No, I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, Minister, that brings to a conclusion of questions for you.
Thank you.
The next questions this morning are in reference to the statement from the Minister of Education. Minister, you have one member who would like to put questions to you, and that is the member from constituency 19. Member Atherton, would you like to put your question now? Member?
Mr. Speaker?
Yes. I see, I don't hear you right now. Can you check? Okay, go now.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, my questions are this. The minister indicated in terms of the social studies curriculum in public schools that they were going to continue to revise and enhance the curriculum so that students have an understanding of their history and their heritage. And so while I'm pleased to see that the very specific reference to Black history, etc., my question to the minister is, what is taught in the schools with respect to Anglo-Saxon and Portuguese history?
Thank you, Minister.
I want to thank that member for that question, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to that when I spoke with the statement, it did talk about history, and the statement was concentrated on the context in which African Bermudian history, as well as Caribbean and African history, is incorporated. All of the other histories are incorporated within the curriculum. However, this spoke specifically to just that. So I'm hoping I'm answering that question. This was something that this government has promised to do and has delivered on. And as I spoke in the statement, this new curriculum, this portion of the curriculum and the revising of the curriculum started this school year in 2019. And so this part of the statement was to specifically point out that with all of the things that we do teach, there is a component that deals with specifically African history, African Caribbean history, and African history in itself. I hope that does answer the question, that the other history is taught within the social studies course, but this particular statement was to focus specifically on those topics that have become quite topical here today with the Black Lives Movement pattern.
Thank you, Minister. And supplementary?
Yes, a supplementary. While I applaud what you're saying, I guess because Bermudians are out there listening, and I realize that if we're going to have a better understanding of the fact that we're all Bermudians and how we mutually interact, it might be useful if people would understand, especially when you talk about primary 1 to 3, about their individual and collectively their heritage. I just wondered, is it possible to indicate to the listening audience that are out there now what type of history is taught with respect to that, bearing in mind that blacks make up 53%, but whites and others make up the rest of it?
Well, I will respond to that and say that I will endeavor to get back. If we know historically, there hasn't been any lack of Anglo-Saxon history taught within our schools. It is time for us to recognize that we need to have this Black history taught within our schools, and we are doing that and moving forward with it. To come now and ask that what are we doing to ensure that our children know about Anglo-Saxon history when it's always been incorporated in the system, I find just a bit disingenuous. But I will endeavor to get back and let the member know exactly what is being taught on that level.
Mr. Speaker, it's unfortunate that the minister would choose to focus on one part of my statement and make a conclusion that it was disingenuous. I said with respect to Portuguese and Anglo-Saxon, because if you look up the official language in Bermuda is English and Portuguese. And so I want to understand, as I'm sure Bermudians out there, what is being taught. I asked the question about the people who make up this country, and I wanted to know genuinely what is being taught. I'm not being disingenuous. I want us to increase our mutual respect in this country and our mutual understanding. So what is taught with respect to Portuguese?
Minister, do you have a response?
Mr. Speaker, I do apologize. I completely dropped off. My computer just shut down, and I missed the last bit of what she said. So if you could repeat that. I am connected on my cell phone while my computer is rebooting.
Okay.
The member basically indicated that she was not being disingenuous. She was just trying to make sure there was a balance to being taught in the schools of our heritage. That's my synopsis. Am I on spot there without you having to repeat it all, member?
Yes, but there's one part I think which is important to repeat is the fact that, as I said, English and Portuguese are the two official languages, and therefore
I wasn't specifically talking about Anglo-Saxon. And my last question was, what is taught in the schools with respect to Portuguese and Portuguese heritage?
And I said earlier in my response that I'll endeavor to get back to the member on exactly that particular topic. But I also wanted to be very, very clear that this particular one, it is a well-known fact that African American history, African Bermudian history, African Caribbean history, and African history has not been equally represented as all of the others. And this was just to point out that we have started to move in that direction. But I will endeavor to get back to that member for a fuller listing of what is taught at the social studies level.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I said before, I just don't want to see the pendulum swing.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you, MP and Minister. Thank you. We now will move on to, but that brings us to an end first of the questions that was put to regarding statements for this morning. So it brings us to a close of the question period. We'll now move on. The next item on the order is congratulatory and obituary speeches. Does any member wish to speak?
Speaker?
Yes. MP Weeks, I believe.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, good morning to you.
Good morning, sir. You have the floor. You have your 3 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Speaker, I would like to send congratulations out to the grandson of Joy Wilson Tucker, and his name is Isaiah Tucker, and his parents, Ryan and Bernadette Tucker, for doing such an excellent job. This past Monday, Mr. Speaker, Isaiah graduated from the Berkeley. He received a number of awards. One was the Girl Community Service Award for giving over 100 hours of community service. He also received the Berkeley PTA Scholarship Award for his excellent academics. This fall, Mr. Speaker, this young Isaiah Tucker will be studying marine science at Roger Williams University. And also, I must add that he took part in this good adventurous journey back in Zambia in 2009. So definitely he is an adventurous spirit. Also, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take this time to send belated birthday wishes to Mr. Edmund Wilson. He celebrated his birthday yesterday. Some of you may remember Mr. Wilson as the former Commissioner of Prisons. He was also an educational officer. He is now a senior, enjoying his life, and I think it's just fitting that I sent out congratulatory remarks on his belated birthday. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member.
Mr. Speaker?
Member to speak?
Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker?
Yes.
Minister?
I don't remember. I think I heard a male voice first. Was it Minister of Education?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, you have your 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to send congratulations.
We know that your camera, and let me remind members about trying to have the video on when they speak as well. I know you had difficulty with your system just now, but I'm reminding to all members to make sure their camera's on.
Okay. How is that, Mr. Speaker?
You're perfect.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, I want to take this time to send a congratulations to all of our graduation seniors that have graduated from public schools at the Buckley Institute and Cedar Bridge Academy. And I want to associate the entire House with these congratulations. Mr. Speaker, Cedar Bridge Academy had 115 graduates this year, with 7 of them from the dual enrollment program with the Bermuda College. Buckley Institute had 125 of them, with 11 graduating from the dual enrollment program. Mr. Speaker, while we know COVID has stopped us from doing things how we normally have, and I know these graduates, and judging by some of the comments that we received from the parents, that when they started the senior school 4 years ago, they did not expect to be able to be graduating as they did. But I just want those graduates to know that us in this honorable chambers and us in the Department and Ministry of Education are very proud of them, of what they have accomplished. And I want them to understand that the government will always be there to support them, Mr. Speaker. And so I want to send a hearty congratulations to all of those graduates. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to join Minister Weeks and congratulating Mr. Ed Wilson on his 85th birthday. And I do recognize that MP Weeks would not also include in his accolades that he is a man of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Mr. Speaker, a man of 50.
Am I allowed to
No, you have to do that on another occasion. Was there any other member who'd like to speak on congratulations and condolences? I had heard MP Atherton earlier. Are you still interested in speaking? Yes.
I would like to speak, Mr.
Yes, go ahead, MP Atherton.
I'd like to speak also, Mr. Speaker.
Scott, Mr. Speaker. It was MP Scott.
Yeah, Leo Scott.
I'm sorry.
Can you hear me, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, Opposition Deputy Opposition Leader, my apologies. Oh, you this morning.
I'm fine, thank you. Can you see me?
I see your computer. And no, I don't see you anything. I hear your voice though.
Now can you see me?
No.
Oh, I can see me.
You can see you, yeah? We can't see you there. Keep talking, don't you?
Okay.
I have to keep talking until you get it sorted out.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, I would like to offer congratulations today to Martha Dismont, who has retired from the Family Center. And anybody that knows Martha knows her tireless efforts that she has expended for over 30 years within this community. I've known Martha since I think 28 years. She started out at the Family Center over on
Associate.
I don't know who that is, but Associate.
Associated too.
Yes, me too.
Associate me as well.
Okay. Associate the entire house. I suggest you associate the entire house.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will associate the entire house. Martha started out on Victoria Street in the building that used to be the Bermuda Sun. And when she started out, it was just Martha and I think one other person. And to be a part of her growth and watch what she has done for this community and continue to be a champion for the rights of our children and for the rights of the members of this country. I wish her every success as she embarks on her new journey. I don't know what that is going to be. I know that one of the things that she always says to me is, I talk about the Family Center, I cannot talk about it without including Martha's name. And I have to learn that she's not there working anymore. And I just want to commend the Family Center. And I think Sandy, I don't know her last name, is going to take over the role that Martha had. But I hope that they continue to grow by leaps and bounds. And I hope that we continue to support them as an organization and as a charity. I partnered with Martha at the beginning of the pandemic to assist her in helping families in need. And we raised quite a bit of money to help people. And I will continue to do so. So I wish her well in her retirement, and I thank her for all that she has done for Bermuda. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Deputy Opposition Leader. Does any other member wish to speak?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, continue, member.
Okay, good morning, all.
Good morning.
Speaker, I just have a few short...
Like MP from Constituency 28?
Yes.
We hear your voice, we don't see your picture, MP. Lester?
Okay. I just have a few short comments. I just like to send condolences to the family of Mrs. Philippa Bassett, 34 Permanent Seal in her 86th year. So condolences to her family. And also, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to send a happy birthday shout out to my fiance, who today is her 25th birthday. So I'd like to send out congratulations to her, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, still.
Yes, continue.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much.
Yes, sounds like Mr. Carroll.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with some regret, I also wish to associate with the condolences for Ms. Philippa Bassett. She was actually a constituent of mine and a family friend. Her and her deceased husband, Ted Bassett, were family members. So I had an opportunity to have discussions with Ms. Bassett over a number of years, and I can certainly say that it took me a while to realize that she was actually a teacher, because all of her discussions with me were instructional. So I certainly will miss her, and I send special condolences to her son Richard as he and I were colleagues at Cable and Wireless in an earlier life, and so to his siblings as well. Mr. Speaker, changing gears, I had a phone call earlier this week from a lady, and as members of the House, we get lots of phone calls, and I didn't recognize the lady's voice, but she told me her name was Helen Bartley, and from the name, I knew she wasn't one of my constituents. But anyway, she was very excited, telling me about the accomplishments of her granddaughter, Tanea Place, who graduated with the graduating class of Cedar Bridge 2020. She was actually the valedictorian, and her grandmother spoke very, very highly of her. And it didn't, penny didn't drop until I realized that she mentioned her parents, Bryce and Colleen Place, because they're actually constituents of mine up in Carver Heights Road. So I certainly would like to congratulate Tiana, because actually I understand previously she was elected Miss Cedar Bridge, and having graduated now from Cedar Bridge, she's been accepted at Georgia State University. So I wish her all the best, and I look forward to her coming back and taking her place amongst our other graduates coming back to Bermuda. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to also associate myself with the birthday wishes for Edmund Wilson. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker?
Thank MP Terrell, thank you. MP Swan, does it sound like you?
Yes.
MP Swan, continue.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Good morning.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to be associated with the condolences sent out to the Bassett family. And I'd also like, I would like to recognize and say thank you to the PGA of America, whose first female president, Miss Susie Whaley, from Connecticut, is certainly very familiar with Bermuda. They made a historic announcement acknowledging an event, a disastrous event in their history, of where the Caucasian-only rule was in place in PGA, in the Professional Golfers Association of America, which impacted events like the Masters, the US Open, and other major professional golf events. The Horton Smith Award was rescinded because, as a former president, but also as a former Masters champion, he associated very significantly, he and others associated very significantly with that terrible rule that was in place. I am encouraging those in authority, whilst I thank the President, Ms. Whaley, for what she has done in her role as in leadership to bring about this recognition, to also recognize those who were denied their opportunity to even compete in the same Masters that Horton Smith played in. No less than Louis Raphael Kidd Corbin, who through Mr. Speaker, the good work of Dr. Jeffrey Sammons, professor at New York University, which I know you've had the opportunity to meet, has unearthed that Mr. Louis Raphael Kidd Corbin from St. George's was one of the main forerunners to the end of this Caucasian-only rule. When he passed in 1951, he played in major championships, like being the first person of African descent to play in the Canadian Open and other tournaments, only because of his forthrightness and tenacity, and he was able to help break down that barrier. He and presidents like Herman Tushy Bascom, Earl Anderson, Leonard Jones, Bill Pitt Sr., the Lowe brothers, Earl and George Lowe, and others in Bermuda need to be equally recognized, along with other Americans and other persons from the African community who were denied their opportunity, and take a page out of what Major League Baseball has done and the leaders around the country of America recognizing the 100-year anniversary of the Negro Leagues, where there's packed stadiums of blacks only because there was a rule and a culture and a systemic system that prevented
blacks from competing equally economically and
Thank you, member.
professionally.
Your
Thank you.
time has expired on us. Would any other member like to speak this morning?
Mr. Speaker,
Yes, please. Yes, please.
MPF.
Ms. Aspen, I recognize your voice that time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hopefully you can see me.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, I would like.
But didn't see yet.
Okay, do you want to see me? You see me.
Part of the policy that we should see when you speak. Yes.
Let's see if it'll come up then.
Okay. Keep talking as you're adjusting it.
Okay. All right. Hopefully it'll yes. Okay.
Yes, there you go. Continue.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to be associated with the congratulatory remarks to Martha this month. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Martha is one of those individuals that, although she says she's stopped working, she never has and never will. And Bermuda has been very fortunate to have had her out there, not only working for children in the beginning, but also for families. And Dr. Sandy De Silva, who's taking over from her, I'm sure will carry on her tradition. I would like also to have best wishes sent out to Nadavia Williams and also to Kirk Wilkes Jr., the two soldiers who were injured. I just want them to know, especially Nadavia, who I know.
With our young Bermudians who are interested in the arts. I'd like to associate myself with the comments made in regards to Mr. Edmund Wilson. Mr. Wilson taught me at Sands. He was a no-nonsense teacher, but had a great heart, and he was committed to education. So I wish him all the very best on his birthday. I'd like to associate myself with the comments made in regards to the senior schools graduates. They've all had a trying year, but they've all come through. They have achieved success and are on their way despite the challenges of COVID. And they are committed. The speakers gave very strong messages at the graduations, and I'm sure that our young people will have their path. They will be on their path to success. Again, I also send support and congratulations to the teachers for the work done today. Martha, this month is in a
world of her social justice and supporting families in Bermuda is unbelievable. I wish her all the best in her retirement, but as was said, she's not going to retire. I'm sure she has other projects on the horizon because she's a person committed to supporting our people and supporting the development of young people. So I'd like to be associated with that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, MP. And the other voice that I had heard before was MP Commission. MP Commission, would you like to make your comments now?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I may, very quickly, I was heartened to hear the comments by opposite member Janine Atherton with respect to those young men that were horribly injured, particularly Mr. Williams. I remember my wife and I taking a short walk on Harbor Road, and during the time of the so-called lockdown, and I remember commending these young men of the job they were doing at the checkpoint near Belmont on Harbor Road, and you could see the reaction from them. They were so happy to know that they were being appreciated. Mr. Speaker, but more particularly to this part of our agenda, I just want to offer condolences to the family of Henry De Silva, who Bermudian, quintessential Bermudian, who passed away hundreds of miles from his beloved homeland of Bermuda in Virginia. He is the father of the police officer Don De Silva, Detective Don De Silva, Louis De Silva, Andrea Felder, Norman, Jennifer Keynes, Carl De Silva, Sherry De Silva, Terry Smith. The names go on. And we are related in terms of my wife's family with him and his offspring. And it's a tragic to know that he passed away after a struggle with illness over the last couple of months. And my heart goes out to his family and his numerous offspring. And I know that they're feeling it at this time. We have so many of our people who live overseas and have been there for generations. His daughter, who we're very close with, served in the U.S. military, along with her Bermudian husband. Both were born in that sort of Cleveland County, Harrington Sound area. And I know that they're feeling it right now. So our hearts go out to them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Speaker. Yes, you have the floor. Honorable Famous.
Yeah, morning, sir. How are you? Morning, host. Mr. Speaker. Can you hear me, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, we hear you, sir.
I'd first like to give condolences to the family of Mr. King, a local taxi driver who passed away recently.
Yes.
Also want to give congratulations to the new government of Anguilla, Premier Mr. Webster, the re-elected government of St. Kitts and Nevis, our home country, Prime Minister Harris. Congratulations to the class of 2020 from our alma mater, Berkeley Institute, and the class of 2020 from Cedar Bridge. I want to give special congratulations to my little cousin, Miss Tamia Place. Mr. Speaker, I'll just read out a few things. Miss Tamia Place won the PTSA Shield for Bermuda's highest GPA. Bermuda Secondary, valedictorian, the Cavalier Club Award under the auspices of the Toastmasters Club, which is one of 4 persons receiving this award. The English Language Arts Achievement Award, one of 2 persons receiving this award. The Danielle Richards Award for Excellence in Accounting. The Tamar Richards Math Award, student who most excelled in math. And the Deloitte Limited High School Award. I would like really reiterate that this young lady comes from a strong family. Her grandmother is Miss Helen Bartley. I think you know her. And she said to tell you, make sure I wear my blue and blue today, sir. So, thank you.
Normally, Miss Bartley and I got along very good, but I'm going to comment about that.
Well, she's right up there by Dr. Kane's pa. But anyway, sir, thank you very much. And I also want to give thanks to the young man Wilkes, actually is one of my constituents and his brother in arms, and they grew up together. Mr. Williams is doing his on demand. His mother said his on demand. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, MP. And I'd like to recognize is it Ms. IP Ferber? Mrs. Ferber, would you like to still make a contribution?
I just want to send my condolences to the family of one of my beloved constituents, Miss Ida Young, who passed this week. This is a sister of the great Kenyatta Young. Just sending condolences to her children, siblings, grandchildren, and the Ferguson Park area out there in Southside. Gonna miss her greatly. She wouldn't ever let me leave Ferguson's Park without seeing her. So a very, also a great supporter of the Progressive Labor Party. So condolences goes out to her family, and just wanting to let them know that I am thinking of them at this time. Also wanted to take the opportunity because there were many businesses that had tried to spread their wings and open prior to COVID-19. And I think that it's important that we acknowledge businesses and entrepreneurs who open up in our country and throughout our economy, so that people know about successes. And I'd just like to send the congratulations out to Nikisha Cameron, who has opened up a Black bookstore by the name of the Griot. And I know in our history, we've had many Black bookstores that we can shop at. And when I say Black bookstores, what I mean is that there are books there of our Black history. So just want to send a shout out to them and congratulations to the Griot for taking this step and opening up throughout this COVID-19 period. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Any other Honorable Member wish to speak?
Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker?
Yes.
Mr. Speaker? Yes.
I see you in front of the camera. Were you the one, or ma'am?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to first associate myself with the condolences to the family of Mr. Randolph King, and certainly recognize the opposition leader, including him in that, as I know that Mr. King is a relative of his. I'd also like to ask the House to send a letter of condolence to the family of Mr. Levante Williams, who tragically lost his life in a water accident this weekend. Mr. Williams was a constituent of mine, Mr. Speaker, and I stopped by to visit the family after last evening's press conference to offer my condolences to his mother, Antoinette, his father, Terrence, and his brother, Antoine. And we express and extend our thoughts and prayers to Mr. Williams' family and friends, and as they mourn his passing, may he rest in peace. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to associate myself with congratulatory remarks given my honorable members to all the public school students who participated in graduation or school leaving ceremonies over the past several weeks. I would also like to specifically highlight the recent graduations held by our two public high schools, the Barclay Institute and the Cedar Ridge Academy, with congratulations to the class of 2020, with best wishes to the students in their future endeavors. Our public school educators, of course, deserve to be highlighted and commended as well. In the midst of a global pandemic, they invested their time and resources to ensure our students successfully completed their final year, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank all of our teachers for their service, and congratulations again to the class of 2020. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I know it's probably been done in some way, shape, or form and fashion before, so I hope that you won't wrap my knuckles too hard. But last weekend, the Minister for Community Affairs and Sports and I participated in a drive-through celebration for the trophy presentation for the BFA League champions. And this time I wanted to at least extend officially all of the league champions. I think we may have recognized some already, but I ask that the Honorable House do send a letter of congratulations to the teams involved, and I will associate all members with this. First, the Premier Division champions, the North Village Community Club, the First Division co-champions, Devonshire Colts and St. George's Colts, the under-17 champions, PHC, the under-15 champions, Warren Archer Bows, and the under-13 champions, Next Generation Onions. And I would hope that the House would send an appropriate note of congratulations to those fine football clubs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Premier. MP Simmons, I think you were trying to get in before the Premier was just now. Would you like to make your comments?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join the Premier in acknowledging the graduations of so many of our students throughout Bermuda and the job that they've done, congratulating them on their graduation services that they had in whatever form during this very difficult time. Additionally, and wishing them the very best in all of their future endeavors. Also, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to acknowledge and send out congratulations to Mr. Nelson Ibel, who celebrated his 60th birthday yesterday in his celebration, and we'd like to give him firm congratulations. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Ibel, and I can acknowledge also his brother Monty, are very instrumental in our commercial fishing industry in Bermuda, in our charter fishing industry in Bermuda. Many of us throughout the community have extensive knowledge in the commercial, and I can say that Mr. Nelson Ibel was instrumental in instructing me and showing me in the charter fishing industry, and I appreciate him in the work that he's done just with me and also with many, many, many others in sharing his knowledge and sharing his ability in that area and enhancing us all as we serve the people of Bermuda. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and acknowledging him. Thank you.
Thank you, MP. Does any other member wish to speak?
Mr. Speaker?
Yes, is that opposition leader?
Yes,
member, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. Just trying to make sure my video is on.
Yep, we see you this morning.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. I'd like to echo the sentiments in relation to the fine work that our regiment has and continues to do. It was a shock for all of us. I know to hear of the disturbing news that took place just a few days ago. And so I just want to add my support to the Bermuda Regiment and its efforts to keep Bermuda safe. I have two condolences. They have been mentioned, and I want to echo sentiments to these two individuals. One, first of all, both of them actually are unforgettable once you meet them. And the first I'll say is Randy King, a very close cousin. I declare my interest to say that this is my mother's first cousin, and unfortunately he passed away. And we will surely miss him. He was a longtime member of St. George's Cricket Club, and many of us would say once you met him, that was a piece of work. You would never forget meeting Randy, and so he will be definitely a miss to us. On the other hand, also I'd like to echo the sentiments and declare my interest. Ida Young, who's passed away, as Jess has said, she was a sister, a younger sister of Kenyatta Young. And again, declaring my interest as far as family is concerned, that is my wife's auntie. My wife's father was the eldest of those Youngs, and she'll be sorely missed. I was when I first met her, she was like, "This is buy from St. David's," type of thing, and here I am sitting down with her brother Kenyatta and herself, and listening to a huge amount of history that they had about the labor movement and how we have gotten and progressed to where we are today. So I'm grateful for her life, and will never forget the many chats that we have had. In fact, I have in my possession many memorabilia from Kenyatta and the many marches and many pushes towards equalizing and looking for equity amongst blacks in Bermuda. I have many of these things in my possession, and so again, we lament the loss of Ida Young, a sister who also contributed and supported to the cause. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
Mr. Speaker, I have.
Sounds like the Honourable Opposition Whip. Honourable Member, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to send out condolences to on the death of Elizabeth Britton. She was not in her 92nd year, and she was a long standing member of the constituency 20 in Pembroke Southwest. She was known for her gentle nature and her generosity. She's a very, very sweet woman, and she'll certainly be missed. She was a bit of a figure in the Mayflower Court apartment building, and so I know that there are a number of people that will genuinely miss her. I'd also like to be associated with congratulatory messages to Martha Dismont on her 30 years with the Family Center. I've worked with Martha not so much on frequent occasion, but in the few times that I have worked with her, they have become very long-term and in-depth cases. And if I've ever worked with anyone with more generosity of her time, of advice, of resources to assist, in particular, our young Black males that are suffering from trauma and trying to make a go of it in Bermuda, she certainly is a figure in Bermuda for spearheading and being a leader in that area of support. So I certainly hope that she does continue her philanthropic activities in Bermuda, and that she continues to give her advice and her time so that the next generation of people in the community, especially in the third sector, will follow in her footsteps. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Is there any other Honourable Member wish to speak?
Mr. Speaker, MP Pearman.
MP Pearman, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure if you can see me on the camera. There we are. Hopefully,
yeah, we can see and hear you. Yes.
As the Honourable Deputy Leader said earlier, she could see her, but we couldn't see her. But hopefully, you can see me. It's already been said by several other honourable members, but let me just add my voice of thanks to Martha Dismont. I've had the pleasure and honor and privilege of serving on the board of the Family Center, with working with Martha for the past 10 years plus. And it has been absolutely amazing to me to witness such a formidable person who acts so compassionately and selflessly to try to improve the lot of everyone on this island. She is just a fireball, and it's amazing how much she manages to get done. A lot of people talk about problems that we have and solutions that we may develop, but she just tackles them, gets right in there and does her best. I know that this is not the end of the book for Martha. She will soon be announcing her plans for her future, if she hasn't done so already today. And I know that she has shared with me in confidence, and I know that will continue to be championing causes in the sector that she cares about so much. So we're not seeing the end of Martha, and I know we'll get some more good deeds from Martha, but it really has been a pleasure to work with her and watch her work for the betterment of all Bermudians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, MP. Is there any other member wish to speak? Deputy?
Yes.
Director recognizes the Deputy Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to be associated with the remarks concerning Randy King, a member at the 7-Day Midland Heights Church down there in Hamilton Parish. And I'm sure the church and his family will sorely miss him. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to be associated also with the remarks concerning the graduation of our high school, middle school, and elementary school graduates, and also those that attended school, universities overseas that have graduated. We certainly congratulate them all. Also, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to be associated with the remarks concerning Edmund Wilson, who has been a resident in Hamilton Parish for over 20 years. And I can recall most recently, when I call recently, his last job was the Director of Labor Relations. And I can tell you that I think that Edmund Wilson was the best Labor Relations Director that this country has ever had. Again, happy birthday, Cousin Edmund Wilson.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak? No other member? They'll move on. That now moves on the order paper to matters of privilege, there are none. Personal explanations, there are none. Notice of motions for adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance. There are none. Introduction of bills. Members, today we have 7 government bills to be introduced, and I'll call on the Minister of Finance to introduce his bills. I believe majority of them are his. So, Minister of Finance, would you like to take this moment to introduce your bill?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm introducing the following bills for their first reading so they may be placed on the order paper for the next day of meeting. The ministers and members of the Legislature Salaries and Pensions Amendment Act 2020, the Public Service Superannuation Temporary Amendment Act 2020, National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Amendment Number 2 Act 2020, the Trusts Special Provisions Amendment Act 2020, Registrar of Companies Supervision and Regulation Act 2020, and the Insurance Amendment Act 2020. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, you're on mute. You're on mute, Mr. Speaker.
Sorry. Minister Ferguson, the last bill to be introduced this morning is yours in reference to the Parliamentary Act. Would you like to introduce your bill now?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm introducing the following bill for its first reading so that it may be placed on the order paper for the next day of meeting. Parliamentary Election Amendment Act 2020.
Thank you, Honorable Member. There are no opposition bills, no private members' bills, no notice of motion, which now brings us to the first item for debate today, the orders of the day, and the first item today is the consideration of the Casino Gaming, Casino Fees Amendment Regulations 2020. It's in the name of the Premier. Premier, would you like to introduce this set of regulations? Not to introduce, but present your matter for debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that consideration be given to the draft order entitled the Casino Gaming, Casino Fees Amendment Regulations 2020, proposed to be made by the Minister responsible for gaming and exercise the power conferred by Section 196 of the Casino Gaming Act 2014.
Are there any objections to the Premier continuing? No objections. Premier, continue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to invite this Honorable House to take under consideration the Casino Gaming, Casino Fees Amendment Regulations 2020. These regulations provide the Minister responsible for gaming the authority to waive and to defer the fees prescribed under the regulations. Mr. Speaker, since the Green Paper on Gaming for Bermuda of 2009, we as legislators and the wider community have wrestled with what gaming could represent for Bermuda. In the intervening decade, Mr. Speaker, to say that the economic and tourism landscape of Bermuda and the world have changed would be an understatement. Whatever gaming may have been, it does not on its own represent the sea change required to boost tourism or this economy. It is, however, one of those things that must be pursued, developed, properly regulated, and managed as part of any recovery we hope to advance. Mr. Speaker, the original regulations were made in March 2017 and created a regime of fixed fees in which certain cases were to be reimbursed to the applicant. Honorable members will recall that the regulations call for a casino license application fee of $600,000, a provisional license issue fee of $1.4 million, and a license fee of $1 million. Mr. Speaker, that's $3 million payable before the first dice are rolled or a card is dealt. Mr. Speaker, the rationale for the imposition of such onerous financial requirements is likely to have been threefold. Firstly, to ensure that fly-by-night operations were discouraged from entering the industry to the prejudice of Bermuda's need to maintain high levels of industry in the anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing arena. Secondly, the fees are to be paid into the commission and are meant to support the various regulatory functions and operations. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, these fees also provide the financial support for training for Bermudians entering the gaming industry and critical support to the Problem Gaming Council. Mr. Speaker, what the these regulations did not have was an ability of either the Commission or the Minister responsible for gaming to consider economic changes which would impact the ability of an investor or prospective casino operator to meet the strict fees required. The amendment regulations before the House now include that ability. Mr. Speaker, honorable members will note that the regulations propose that the Minister responsible for gaming may, on application in writing by the Commission, waive or defer payment of a fee under the regulations in whole or in part for a specified period, with respect to a specified person or class of person in exceptional circumstances. Mr. Speaker, the new Regulation 17.2 defines exceptional circumstances, and it will not surprise honorable members to note that these include where a state of emergency has been declared, where a public health emergency has been declared, or in the event of hurricanes, or an event which significantly and negatively impacts a sector of the economy or the community in Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, in this pandemic recovery period, Bermuda will distinguish itself in a crowded marketplace clamoring for investment by demonstrating flexibility and speed. We must anticipate the needs of investors and do what we can to keep existing investors at the table. We must also inspire confidence in those who are looking to invest in Bermuda. Adding this authority to waive and or defer the payment of fees takes into account the very real economic reality that has befallen the world as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. This is the kind of clear signal that we are determined to send, that we are open and accessible, reasonable and determined to fulfill our mandates to the people of Bermuda using our best efforts. Mr. Speaker, the additional amendment proposed to be made by these regulations will retain the allocation of funds to the two critical areas that this industry must also support. Rather than ascribe fixed amounts to these areas, honorable members will note that 10% and 15% of the provisional license fee, respectively, has been proposed to fund the training of Bermudians in the industry and the Problem Gaming Council. This is proportionate with the fixed sums previously set under the 2017 regulations. Mr. Speaker, as I close, today's debate is not a debate on gaming. This is not a debate on the Bermuda Casino Gaming Commission. This is not a debate on the merits of the integrated resort model or any of the other issues which have been canvassed extensively in previous debates in this honorable House. This, Mr. Speaker, is a debate about the change required to ensure gaming can move forward in Bermuda for the benefit of Bermuda and Bermudians. This is a government changing Bermuda's reputation as intractable, slow to change, and tone-deaf to market forces, and we will continue to act decisively. Mr. Speaker, as I commend these regulations for the consideration of this honorable House, I would invite honorable members to recall the already challenging tourism environment during which gaming was advanced by the previous government. That environment has significantly worsened as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. Any true developer's continued interest in revised business model should be supported, and with the change we make today, we acquire the ability to do just that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. Does any other member wish to speak?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can't.
Yes. Good morning. It sounds like the Deputy Opposition Leader.
Yes, but I still.
We hear you. We see a photo of your surroundings, but we don't see you. So as you're talking, you can try and adjust your mic, your camera for us. We'll continue on.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, thank you. And I thank the Honorable Premier for providing me with a copy of his brief before the debate. I agree with the Premier in that we have to make changes to ensure that we can create an economic environment that people can work in and be able to survive in Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, the times that we are living in now were not anticipated. I'm sure that nobody expected that we would be living through a pandemic and that the entire world would be shut down. So I agree with the Premier that we must demonstrate flexibility and speed, and I appreciate the need to be nimble in our legislation in order to adapt to the changes to our environment. And it is important that we get investors here. We anticipate the needs of the people who want to invest in Bermuda and do what we can to keep those investors in Bermuda and putting their money in our country. And keeping them at the table is not going to be an easy job. But we also have to ensure that as we're looking to keep these investors here, that we have to have immigration reform and we have to be welcoming not only to the money of the investors, but to the investors themselves. The Premier said recently in an article in the Royal Gazette that his vision is to get casino gaming up and running as quickly as possible. And I agree. I mean, the act came into force in, I think it was 2014. And we are now 6 years on and we're no further ahead. We don't have an executive director. In 2018, they had advertised 3 times for an executive director. No one has yet come forward to apply for the position. We have been sustaining the Gaming Commission, paying rent and salaries and maintaining overhead. And we're no further ahead in actually getting gaming going in Bermuda. So my question is, we continue to develop a regulatory framework around gaming, but will it become a reality? Or are we just are we taking a gamble and just putting money in a black hole for something that is just not going to happen? And I know the Premier has said that this is not a debate about gaming and the Gaming Commission and banking proceeds and things like that, but that you can't separate them out. I mean, they all have to come together. The truth is that it was anticipated that gaming would be a means of creating employment, and we have not seen that. It is an amenity and it is a tool that can be utilized in our tourism arsenal. But are we going to be able to get it going? And I think that's the thing, that's the answer. We can continue to make laws about and around gaming, but if we're not going to be able to get it going off the ground, then I don't see the sense. And if we're not going to get that as an amenity and a potential revenue stream for the country, then what are we going to do to create jobs? What are we going to do to create a tourism product that is going to attract people to Bermuda, besides our beautiful pink beaches and our wonderful service? We have to find something that is going to make us attractive. I don't gamble. I don't find gambling to be attractive. I just cannot understand why people actually set aside money to lose it, but people do it. And so if we're going to create an infrastructure to support it, then that's great. But we can continue to make rules and make rules and make rules. If it's not going to come to fruition, then it is just a waste of time. So I hope that with this amendment and with the potential investors that are looking to come to Bermuda, that we will be successful. I hope that we can get an executive director, and I hope that we can get gaming moving, because it is something that we need. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. Does any other honorable member wish to speak? None, Premier? Would you like to?
Hello, Mr. Speaker.
I'm sorry.
It's cool.
Go. I hear you. We don't get to see you this morning, though. You haven't got your camera sorted out yet. But
it works.
While you're speaking to us, there you go. Good. All right.
I'd like to follow up on what my colleague has just said. At the end of the day, we're about investment. We're about, improving the tourism product, and we're about ensuring that gaming is an amenity. But I think, as she said, the legislation came into being in 2014, and we have 6 years later, and we're still not got an industry up and running. And we can, make all the rules we want. But the question now becomes, can Bermuda deliver on gaming? At the end of the day, we still are not positioned to support that industry because we don't have all the tools in gaming to make it work yet. We have not jumped all of the hurdles to make gaming in this country operational. And he's wondering, what am I talking about? We've spoken about it before, and that's the banking side. Because gaming involves money, gaming involves shifting money around the world, and therefore we need to have an infrastructure to support that. I listened intently to the Premier's comments, and I thought he would have basically presented some information and an update on what he thinks or where Bermuda stands on getting a banking solution for this industry. Because if we can't get that solution, the industry will not be going anywhere. It will not be going anywhere. I know the banks are having challenges, but I also know that the banks are working on trying to find a solution. But at the end of the day, we cannot deliver on this industry. And all the frameworks, all the rules are null and void until we pass the obstacles, address the obstacles, and provide infrastructure that truly can support the industry. At this point, we cannot support the industry because we don't have the tools to do so. So I'd like to, for the Premier to speak to what is going on in that space and what is stopping us other than the banking side to deliver the gaming industry. As we said, some of our institutions are ready to do it now, but we as a jurisdiction cannot deliver because we have not provided a solution to the banking side of the industry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Does any other Honorable Member wish to speak?
I do, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, MP Epton, your voice came across first at a time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Are you able to see me now? I must make sure that I get it properly.
I can hear you. I still don't see you. Yes, now we see you. Yes.
Okay. So, Mr. Speaker, I guess my questions are this, and it takes off from where my colleague Cole Simon spoke. When I saw that casino gaming was going to transfer to the Premier, I thought that meant there's going to be some action because the Premier had always talked about this being an industry that was going to be very important to Bermuda. And I am disappointed that this just has to deal with money and has to deal with fees with no indication as to when anything might occur. I'm reflecting back on the fact that before there was an indication that there would be opportunity for people to be trained, that people could end up, becoming people that would not only work into the industry, that there was the opportunity for people with respect to management, etc. And we keep talking about our tourism industry, and we keep talking about having new attractions to offer our tourists. Bearing in mind that we're going to now go into this new normal, I'd like to think that the Premier would tell us what is the holdup, what is causing us not to be able to roll this out and say to the people, especially the people that are building hotels. You have the hotel down in St. George's, and everybody's sort of saying, okay, there was the belief that the hotel would open up, there would be gaming. That would be really great for St. George's with respect to the trade-offs or the extended economic activity, and we haven't heard anything other than the fact that there's some change in fees. I know that you have to talk about what would happen with respect to COVID or any other health disruption, but to me, I was expecting to hear something that was going to say, these are the fees because now we're going to start. We have a way to introduce gaming here, and we're putting some new fees in place so that people can say, "Oh, great! I've got the opportunity now to get into this new industry." So, as my colleague Cole Simon said, and I'm sure others will say, it's in the Premier's lap. We are expecting to hear something more about how it's going to start and some indication of preparation, because even if it were to start next month, I know that training for some of the jobs in there takes longer than that. I know that there's infrastructure training, and not enough has been said about any of that for a long time. So I'd like to think that the Premier would tell us what's holding it up and give the people of Bermuda some realistic indication of when he thinks that this industry will actually come to Bermuda. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Does any other Honorable Member wish to speak?
I do, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
I do as well, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Member Pentland?
Yes, thank you, sir.
Honorable Member, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Not sure if you can see me. Oh, here we are. Yes. Mr. Speaker, I just have to refer to the Honorable Premier's introductory statement on the legislation that we are doing today, and to tie those into the comments that have been made by my honorable colleagues heretofore. The Premier indicated about what today's legislation is not. It is not, he says, a debate on gaming, excuse me, which has been had extensively. It is not, he said, a debate on the Bermuda Casino Gaming Commission, and it's not a debate on the merits of the integrated resort model or any of the other issues which have been canvassed extensively in previous debates. Mr. Speaker, any changes that we make to the legislative framework surrounding gaming is inextricably intertwined with all of those issues that the Premier has just indicated that this debate is not. And I realize that the debate surrounds the changes that are being made and the fee structure and the like, and to show that we are nimble and to put us in a position of being able to respond when the call is made by the respective stakeholders. But Mr. Speaker, it's important to understand that the one thing about legislation is that all motion is not progress. This legislation today is motion. It's not necessarily progress. We cannot make progress in this field, Mr. Speaker, no matter how nimble we are, if the various portions of the infrastructure and the overarching conditions are not put in place. So while I applaud the idea of trying to appear that we are not tone deaf and that we are not slow to market forces, and that we will continue to act decisively. Mr. Speaker, what the Premier is really saying in his statement is, don't look at our failures, look at our intangible aspirations. And I don't know that that's good enough, Mr. Speaker, for the people of Bermuda. And what I'm suggesting is my support for the comments that have been made by my honorable colleagues who have spoken before me, in terms of there is nothing wrong if this is the intent to continue down this path in respect of gaming. We could have the educational component. I think this is something that we heard about that was being put in place 3 or 4 years ago, Mr. Speaker. There is no reason why we cannot at least have it reach that stage in terms of educating people how, how their involvement in this industry can be monetized almost at the very moment that the industry becomes operational, if in fact that does happen. It doesn't hurt to train somebody. It's always better to be prepared and not required than to be required and not prepared. And I believe that what we have seen thus far in the movement towards making sure that this is a significant industry that could create significant jobs, that there are things that we as a country have failed to do or have been unsuccessful in achieving. And I don't think it's fair for the Premier to come with this particular legislation, which I understand, and I know exactly what is being done here, but to say, don't discuss these things, let's just look at what we want to do. It's almost like, Mr. Speaker, when you see Penn and Teller on the stage and David Copperfield on the stage, Mr. Speaker, it's not about what you see in the left hand or what you see in the right hand. Let us be honest and forthright and straightforward with the people of Bermuda to say that this is the position. When we come with these kinds of changes, Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that it is out of order for there to be a statement so that the people of Bermuda understand the purpose behind our nimbleness and our necessity to be nimble in changing the legislation. So let us give an overarching statement saying, this is where we are, this is what we're doing, this is what we have accomplished, these are still our challenges, this is what we're looking for. We know that there are hotels, we have people who are investing in infrastructure, in physical plant, who had a reasonable expectation to believe that once their organizations were able to be up and running, there would be some support for their expectation, for their expectation that there would be gaming. And right now, it's fine to say we're not going to charge you the fees as and when, that we're going to make sure that you can pay and there can be extenuating circumstances considered on application. But by the same token, Mr. Speaker, that is all of no consequence if there isn't something that we can give them to hold on to. I underscore, Mr. Speaker, this is not a criticism. It is just wanting information so that the people of Bermuda can say, is this a legitimate expectation that this industry will be up and running? It's fine to make legislative changes. It's fine to do all of those things to show that we can respond. But what are we responding to? What are the challenges that still obtain from the commencement of this initiative, probably however long ago it has been, until now? Where do we stand? What are our realistic chances of finding some kinds of solution to the challenges that we have? So to say that this is not the debate on the Casino Gaming Commission, it is, I respectfully submit, it is a debate on the Casino Gaming Commission. It is a debate on gaming. It is a debate on the merits of the resort model. And it is a debate on all of those things, Mr. Speaker, because without them, the legislation that we are debating today will have absolutely zero consequence or economic impact. And what we are looking for, Mr. Speaker, is for the government to show how they are being efficient and effective with implementing some level of economic activity and changing legislation to say that we're going to manage the component parts of an industry when the main thrust has not been addressed somehow seems to be a futile effort. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member. Does any other member wish to speak?
Mr. Speaker.
Yes. Continue, Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I listened to some of the commentary from colleagues and just astounded. We have a colleague who is a banker, and we have a colleague who is a director of a bank. And I have been in the House on a number of occasions when gaming was a part of my portfolio, explaining the position that we find ourselves in as a country. The issue then is the issue now. And I will recall that in 2016, before my venture into politics, it was my bank, former employer, the Bank of Butterfield, who made the government of the day, the OBA government, aware that they were going quick, fast, in a hurry down a path about to crash into a wall because they had not consulted the banks on banking the proceeds from gaming. And I took then Minister of Tourism, the Honorable Sean Quackwell, along with the Executive Director, Mr. Schultz, and the Chairman of the Gaming Commission at that time, Councilor Alan Dunch, to New York to meet with the Bank of New York, who at that point in time had some serious concerns about gaming in Bermuda. Bank of New York, for those who don't remember, is the principal correspondent bank for Butterfield Bank. And Butterfield's concerns were that if they upset their correspondent, they would run the risk of losing the ability to move money around the country that is a critical part of our financial services industry. The notion that members would be critical of amending legislation that makes it more adaptable, more flexible to the participants in the industry is alarming. One, I recall that the structure of the legislation had a one-size-fits-all approach. I certainly can appreciate.
Sir? Mr. Speaker, I have a point of order.
A point of order?
Yes, sir.
Your point of order?
Yes, I believe the honorable member, maybe by inadvertently, is misleading the House. I don't think I heard anybody criticize the legislation that is being put forward. What was being criticized is the progression of the structure as to where we are, and we've had no report in respect thereof. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I would remind the honorable colleague of her own recitation, which she made a point about not being critical, but in fact, in my view, was critical. And so her point of order is a subject of her opinion, and I respect this much, but I disagree with her. The reality is that there was a one-size-fits-all, and this government, in the making the amendments it's making today, is seeking to be adaptable to the participants in the industry. One certainly does not criticize the former government for a one-size-fits-all approach, because in the days that the legislation was initially passed, there was no industry. We now have two participants at least, and their characters are somewhat different, and their geographies in terms of their businesses are different. So to make legislative changes to reflect the changing dynamics of each of the participants seems to me to be a wise thing. I'm not sure why anyone would ever be critical of adapting to the industry that we're trying to grow. What I will say is this, that the banking piece continues to make progress. And the progress that has been made on the banking piece has all come during the duration of this government's term. We are close, but there's still more work to be done. And I would say that as long as we can get the banks comfortable, and I think they are comfortable with a solution, and now the work that needs to be done is to get their correspondents comfortable. And once the correspondents are comfortable, then we can move forward. But there's been significant progress, and I've reported on it a number of times in this House. And so we'll continue to do the work, and we'll look forward to a day when there is gaming in Bermuda. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Is any other member wish to speak?
Mr. Speaker, MP Chairman.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker.
Yes. Would you like to speak now?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, but I believe there were two people, so who are you recognizing?
I called MP, the voice I called Law was your voice, so
Okay.
Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the introductory by the Honorable Premier and the comments just now from the Honorable Finance Minister. I think we should be clear that we are not critical of this set of regulations. What we are critical is, and specifically to my point, the criticism is around the Honorable Premier's introduction today, in which the Honorable Premier made the point to state in his brief that this debate was not about gaming. Well, it is all about gaming, because obviously if we don't have a structure, if we don't have an organization in place, these regulations that we make won't mount to much in that regard. And I'll come back to that more in just a few minutes. But in regard to these regulations, Mr. Speaker, we understand and we can appreciate the need for flexibility, as the government members have said during this debate. Certainly, in a world that changes so quickly, you need flexibility. Certainly in a world that now is beset with more difficult conditions than anyone would have imagined at the beginning of the year, you need more flexibility. So there is the support for the ability, the need for that flexibility by the government. I think, Mr. Speaker, in my view, what would have been suitable and helpful during this debate would be for the Honorable Premier and colleagues to give a bit of an overview, a bit of a flavor, you might say in a different way, to what the feedback is with our potential gaming partners in regard to the flexibility that they need to open their casinos. Because here we are today, we're being asked to support the regulations with a very short brief by the Premier, and the brief trying to say to us, well, stay in the sandbox. All we're talking about is the regulations here today. We don't want to talk about anything else. And so we have an issue, because the more detail on what the industry or potential industry partners need in Bermuda is important. And where we stand generally with gaming is important. Now, in regard to the regulations specifically themselves, Mr. Speaker, I think that colleagues would appreciate and realize that we have a fee-based government. The revenue raised by government is for fees all over, throughout our community, whether it's land tax or your dog license or license for a well, business licenses, everything you pay for a fee. That's how government raises its revenue. And the Premier did allude to the fact that in the introductory that he gave a few moments ago, that with these regulations, gaming was set up to allow for the industry to be run by the fees that were charged to the players within the industry. And that is correct. That is what we what we envisioned as the OBA, that we would allow the industry to pay the fees to help run the industry from the beginning to the end. So not only to open their casino, but also to deal with problem gaming, to deal with training, all of those type of things. And so I'm pleased to see that the Premier still recognizes that this is an appropriate approach. And now that the government is going to give themselves the flexibility to waive fees or change fees through the period coming up, I think it would be appropriate just what they envision that to be. And if they envision that the industry will still be able to support itself through the fees paid to government, that would help us. That would bring some clarity to this issue. That would certainly allow us to have a better understanding of the regulations other than just reading them on paper. We know that there are a couple of partners that are looking to open up a casino. I don't think anything's changed since the time when we were the government. That the hotel in the East End and a property in town are interested in that because they were close at that point in time. And we also realized, Mr. Speaker, as the Honorable Finance Minister alluded to during his short presentation, that we realized from the very beginning that banking would be a very difficult scenario to deal with in gaming. And our approach was at that time that to help make the banking challenge surmountable is that if we had a good framework, a good structure in place for gaming, it would be easier for correspondent banks to help us get through and deal with that hurdle so that our partners in Bermuda did have a bank that they could work with. So we always realized that challenge. And now, as the Minister of Finance has shifted from a bank that was interested in being a partner to the minister responsible, he sees the challenge from a different seat, so to speak, Mr. Speaker. And I'm pleased to see that the Honorable Minister says that we are now close and that they've made significant progress. However, we've heard that in statements in the past. We've heard that over the past 3 years, and we haven't seen any fruits to a final decision being made. So we'll take the minister at his word, but we look forward to, with this significant progress, we look forward, Mr. Speaker, to having the government come to Parliament very shortly and say, yes, we found a correspondent bank. Because clearly, if government is waiving the potential to waive fees to allow them to work with partners to put them in a better position to open their casinos, and with the hotel in the East End due to open next year and the other partner already open at this point in time, it would seem that the sand is coming out of the hourglass very quickly, and that potential partners in gaming are going to need that correspondent bank. And so while we will pass the regulations here today, whether the opposition supports it or not, because we don't have any numbers to make a difference, it is clear that there is a timeline approaching very quickly where potential partners in gaming will need to see not only significant progress in correspondent banking, but the ability to work with a bank to actually deal with the proceeds for gaming. So, Mr. Speaker, the Premier did not want to have a debate about gaming, but this is what the bill is about today. It's about gaming. So we dealt with the banking issue. One other issue that's important, Mr. Speaker, because obviously, we've seen gaming, in my view, become a hot potato by the current government. A hot potato in the fact that we have seen a number of different ministers, and now it's back in the Premier's lap, and we wonder how long he can hold on to that hot potato. But unless we have a structure and an organization that works for gaming, the industry will not be successful. And I think we all know that. Act on that for just a short minute, Mr. Speaker, because obviously this is a complicated industry. This is an industry that comes with the challenges. This is an industry that could have those who want to be less forthright with how proceeds of gaming used, take it in a different direction. So we need to have all the checks and balances in place so this further amenity to our tourism industry can be the success that we all want it to be. Let's face it, we've spent a great deal of time and a significant amount of money to date on the gaming industry. We're close enough now where, you know, you might be able to see the rise and where you'll have some success. We have to get it right. And so we can take government at the face value about correspondent banking. And we look forward for an announcement very soon about who that partner will be. But we also, Mr. Speaker, need to see how the structure and organization is going to work to be successful, because if we're going to have a correspondent bank, if we're going to have licenses being issued to casinos, we need to have somebody who's running the organization. It cannot be government ministers. Ministers have their place in our system of governance, but we cannot have government ministers interfering with day-to-day activities of something as important as gaming. And that's why the Bermuda Casino Gaming Commission was set up. So perhaps when the minister, a minister would like to speak, or the premier wraps up, he can give an update on our search for an executive director, because this government has failed in that. It's been 3 years and we cannot find an executive director. Maybe government has found one and they just haven't told us yet. But in 3 years, we cannot find an executive director. It doesn't sit well with gaming. It certainly doesn't sit well with our partners if they don't have somebody responsible at the Bermuda Casino Gaming Commission that they can go to on a day-to-day basis with any questions or any concerns or any initiatives that they'd like to launch. So I would ask that the premier give an update on where we stand with an executive director. And so having a proper structure is important, Mr. Speaker. An executive director is a key part of that. And I guess the last thing that I would just like to touch on a little bit, because the Honorable Premier did say that this is not a discussion about the model that we're using, and I have read his brief very quickly, that it's not a debate on the merits of the integrated resort model or any issues previously canvassed on the House. Well, we take difference to that. I'm not going to discuss the model in itself, Mr. Speaker, but as we talk today about fees, and as the Minister of Finance has talked about a correspondent bank, perhaps the government will give an update on their views on cashless gaming. And is that going to be the way to go? Because we know there's been a great deal of controversy about cashless gaming through the time. So where does that stand in the scenario that this government today sees going forward? So, Mr. Speaker, in wrapping up, yes, we always want a government to be more flexible, be able to move, be able to deal with concerns, certainly in these very difficult and challenging times we face. And I think that there are many of us in the community who really don't understand the enormous challenge we do face at this present time. So we want that flexibility. But as we debate this amendment today, which is not minor, but it is not that complicated, we also need to look at the broader scope of the challenges we face in gaming. So where's the leadership coming from? Because government hasn't showed it yet. There hasn't been any progress, Mr. Speaker, other than words. And words are not progress. No licenses are issued. There's no executive director, and we still don't have clarity on who the correspondent bank's going to be. So I support a government being nimble, but the premier, now that there's hot potatoes back in his lap, needs to deal with it and answer questions so everyone in this house and people in the community understand where we're going to go, and our partners buy into fully what the changes are taking place and the future of this industry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Yes, any other Honourable Member wish to speak?
Mr. Speaker, MP Perman.
Yes, MP, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rather interestingly,
We hear you. I can't see you, but we hear you right now.
I can get you to see me. Here we go.
There you go.
Mr. Speaker, rather interestingly, when the Honorable Premier opened the debate on these regulations, he sought to define the parameters of the debate, telling us what we are allowed to talk about and what we're not allowed to talk about. Unlike some of my other colleagues, I will accept the parameters as defined by the Premier, which is that this is a debate about a change required to ensure gaming can move forward in Bermuda. So let's look at what the change is really doing, because it is difficult when we look at an amending regulation we get a piece of paper, in this case, 3 pages, and we just see a few words changed here and a few words changed there. And unless you go back and look at the principal regulations and look through those and look how the words that are changing apply, it's hard to know what's really going on here. What's going on here is the ability for the government to reduce fees in respect of gaming. And if you put it like that, you can understand why the government might need greater flexibility to reduce fees in respect of gaming, because they might want to have the flexibility to make it more affordable for those to enter into Bermuda and carry out casino gaming. But the fees that are being amended are not limited just to those fees, because the fees that were provided for did not go merely to the government. And I just want to highlight this point because the Honorable Premier did touch upon the point in his opening remarks. And he said, honorable members will note that 10% and 15% of the provisional license fee has been proposed to fund the training of Bermudians and the Problem Gaming Council. And so it's necessary to look at the amendments to see what's happening for the fees that were previously going to go towards either those who may have gambling addiction issues, so money to support people in the community that might have gambling problems, and secondly, money that was earmarked to go towards the employment of Bermudians so that they could participate in the gaming industry. And the Honorable Premier in his remarks described the change as being something where the new proposals were, quote, proportionate, quote, with the fixed sums previously provided. Well, in respect of addiction issues, the previous regulations were going to provide $150,000 out of the provisional license issue fee. Now, the provisional license issue fee, the Honorable Premier noted, was to be $1.4 million. That's now changing to 10%. And perhaps it's proportionate, but it is a reduction. So by reason of the change, if the fee stays the same, the amount of money being given to help treat those with gambling addiction issues will be going down. Likewise, the amount that was allocated to train Bermudians for employment in casinos, $250,000 under the previous regulations, is now being adjusted to 15% of the fee. The fee, as we remember, if it stays the same, was $1.4 million. So that too is going down. It's going down from a fixed fee of $250,000 to a reduction to $210,000, if the fee stays the same. But another change that's important for these regulations is that the fee might not stay the same. So not only might the money allocated for addiction issues and to employ Bermudians go down, but it could also go down drastically now because the bill is seeking to put this as a percentage. So instead of having a fixed earmark amount of $150,000 here, $250,000 there, solid, tangible amounts for addiction, for employment of Bermudians, we're now going to have a percentage adjustment based upon the fee. And this change allows that fee to be waived in whole or in part. Now, obviously, whether it's waived in whole or in part will depend upon the factors set out in Clause 3 of the amending regulations. But if the fee is waived in whole or in part, we must appreciate, and it must be appreciated by those in this honorable House and by the members of the public, that that reduction could greatly reduce the amount of money that was earmarked both for those with gambling addiction issues and for those which was going to be earmarked for the employment of Bermudians. So sometimes the devil's in the detail, Mr. Speaker, but I just want everyone to know that that's what this change could mean. And it would be greatly unfortunate if Bermuda were to see casino gaming, but the protective measures in relation to gambling addiction were watered down, and the positive, very positive measures involving employment, monies for employment of Bermudians were also to be watered down. So watch this space. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. Does any other honorable member wish to speak?
Mr. Speaker, I have a few words.
It sounds like the opposition whip. Honorable member, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For me, I believe that the elephant in the room is, are these fees being changed or being given a little more flexibility, because there may be other layers of non-casino gaming that may be out there that the government wishes to support in building an industry here in Bermuda. I mean, certainly we've had in the history some fintech companies that have wanted to do some sports trading activities. We've had, the long existing betting shops that we've had in Bermuda. And so my curiosity is whether these fees are being changed so that it will allow more what I'm going to consider to be local betting on island. So there are a couple of things that cross my mind. These betting institutions, companies that may want to set up on island, the premier in the past has always said that, there's a lot of scrutiny before any businesses, in particular in the fintech industry, are opened up for services here in Bermuda, and I would hope that that would continue. But at the same time, are these fees being adjusted to allow more of these online betting activities to occur? In addition, any of the sort of local betting houses, is this also an initiative to and allow an increase in any of the local betting? And of course, my concern pivots directly to that in this economically challenged time, I would imagine that many of the customers are going to be locals. And so if we are going to, on the one hand, try to encourage business in Bermuda in order to improve revenue and get the economy going, but on the other hand, it's at the detriment to the capacity around gambling, then there's some reason for concern, and certainly further mentioned and around therapeutic support services that may be needed for any of the local population that's getting involved in gaming, if we're going to be seeing a bit of an open door as far as increased presence of gaming houses and online betting activities in Bermuda. And with that, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. Does any other honorable member wish to speak?
You're probably right there.
Does any other member wish to speak? No,
Happy to close this.
Yes, and we're 4 minutes for one, so you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to see so much interest in this topic from members of the opposition. The honorable members opposite certainly have made a lot of noise, and by the noise that has been made, Mr. Speaker, you would think that casinos opened under their tenure when they were the government and somehow managed to close under our tenure as the government, Mr. Speaker. But I'm very happy that the Honorable Minister of Finance corrected the record so that people could not run away from the history. Mr. Speaker, let me just be clear. 100% of nothing is nothing. And that's what we have right now, nothing. And we are going to build something. As I said in my brief, Mr. Speaker, that this was not a debate on gaming. This is a change to the fees regulation. And I'm happy that the opposition is supportive of the fees changes that are part of these regulations, which have been brought by the government. There will be a chance to debate gaming before this House rises for the summer. This is the next day of sitting. I will table amendments to the Casino Gaming Act. And I'll be happy to have a full gamut of a gaming discussion at that time. And I will also be happy to give a ministerial statement on the tabling of that bill to answer many of the different matters which may have been raised by members of the opposition, but to give the country a full update on where we stand in regards to our progress on casino gaming here in Bermuda. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I move that the said draft order be approved and that a suitable message be sent to His Excellency, the Governor.
Thank you, Premier. Are there any objections to it being approved and the said message being sent? No objections? We'll consider that matter has been approved and the said message will be sent. Premier, it is 2 minutes before that 1 o'clock hour. If you'd like to move us to lunch, we can acknowledge that at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Happy to do so. Mr. Speaker, I move that the Honorable House now adjourn the lunch until 2 p.m.
Any objections to that? No objections. And the House now stands adjourned until 2 p.m. for the lunch period. And just to remind the members, for the ease of being able to get on again, if you want to just mute your mics and turn off your cameras, your system will stay active until we resume in an hour. Enjoy your lunch. The House is now adjourned.